We were exhausted when we got home, and other than taking care of Nick and spending time together, we didn't do much for the next couple of days. Not so much as try to step outside. Part of it was the fatigue, but only part. We were also terrified, in shock and horror from what we'd just lived through, and in dread of what was ahead of us. Because we discussed it, Gordon and I, and we knew things had to change. This world was getting more dangerous the deeper we sunk into it, and we had to find a new way of pleasing our benefactor while keeping our family safe. It sounded reasonable when we said it in hushed tones amongst ourselves, but I could see my own fear reflected in Gordon's eyes. Fear of reprisal, or worse, rejection, and what that might mean for our miraculous little life together. So we stayed inside, spent time together as a family. In some ways, it was a really magical time. I remember having the thought at one point, I think we were laughing over a board game at the time, that it was as if we were living in some wonderful snow globe, protected and separate from the darkness of the world outside. I didn't know how right I was. On the third day, I woke up to the sound of panicked, breathless cursing at the front of the house. It was Gordon, tugging on the doors and windows, so angry and scared that it took me asking what was wrong several times before he even registered it, and turned to look at me, eyes wide as dinner plates. "It's the house, Gracie. None of the doors will open. Windows neither. Not like they're stuck, but like they were never made to be opened." Something so strange should have brought questions or doubts, but I had none. I trusted Gordon. He was no fool or coward, and if he was that close to losing control, well, there wasn't really anything to discuss. We just needed to get out. So I picked up a fireplace poker and started trying to break or pry open a window or door. When that didn't work, I got a softball bat from the closet. Then an electric drill. You could chip paint and scratch wood, but nothing deep. And if you went back a few minutes later to an old wound, you'd find it had flowed together again like running wax. Of course, by then we were starting to discuss things more. If brute force wasn't going to be the answer, then we needed to figure out what had caused this. We discussed options, both mundane and otherwise, over the next couple of hours. Nick had woken up by this point, so we had to keep the tone light and act to him like Gordon and I were playing some kind of strange game. My smile and laughter seemed painfully brittle as we went over different possible scenarios. Had we been drugged? Was there some gas leak or toxin causing us to hallucinate? It seemed unlikely, as we were seeing the same things and weren't noticing any strange behavior in each other, or Nick. Was there something supernaturally wrong with the house? While neither of us were against the idea of a house being haunted, we'd never had any sign of anything strange there before. But if what we were seeing was, in fact, real, we'd gone past the point of it making sense without it being paranormal. Somewhere between him breaking the poker against a window and me drilling into the sealed back door with no effect. The most obvious cause was right in front of us the whole time, of course. Or right behind us, maybe. But as my grandfather used to say, we were circling like flies dancing around a pile of shit. Neither of us wanted it to be connected to the work, especially not to the last job, to the thing that slaughtered that whole family. But when we'd run out of ways to circle, it was Gordon that said it first. His face was still stiff with fear, but the anger was gone now. In its place was a sickly dread that made my stomach curdle as he said the words. It followed us home, didn't it? I wanted to argue, but instead I nodded. I think so, yes. I lowered my voice, though I didn't know that it would make any real difference. We have to get out of here. We have to get Nick out of here. Gordon's face darkened slightly. What do you think? He shook his head. No, I'm sorry. You're right, of course. Nothing we've tried has worked, so we need to think of something we haven't. Hand trembling, I pushed a sweaty strand of hair out of my face. Do you think it knows we're here? Our master? I usually avoided referring to it in such unvarnished terms. mostly because the idea of giving myself over so much to something so unknown was terrifying to me. But now wasn't the time for word games or illusions. I saw Gordon note the word in his expression before giving me a slow, tired shrug. I don't know, Grace. Maybe. Maybe it knows, but can't do anything about it. It clearly didn't stop it from happening, if we're right about the source of this. He gestured around at the room. This trap. Shaking his head, he sat down on the floor. Or maybe it just doesn't care. My tongue felt thick as I swallowed down his words. We'd become so comfortable and confident in our special, protected status that even when we were scared, we were never hopeless. We assumed that the dangers would be overcome, either by us or by our benefactor. But what if it had cast us aside? Or what if it wanted to help, but was just powerless to do so? But no, hadn't it saved Gordon? Hadn't it protected us from afar countless times before? Even the rituals we did were largely just acts of showmanship for the clients. That, and well, maybe a showing of faith and trust on our part as well. We should pray. Gordon glanced up at me with a frown. What? To the master? I nodded. Maybe it will reach him. He puffed out a breath as he looked up at the ceiling. I don't know, Gracie. We don't worship it. We just work for it. I don't know what you think that would do. I felt anger flare up in my belly, fueled by frustration and fear. I think that we don't have the luxury of discarding ideas because they make us uncomfortable, and that the time for semantics is past. Whatever else we are its servants, and we don't know unless we try. Falling to my knees, I clasped my hands tightly in a knot, heart pounding in my chest as I tried to find the right way to start. Gordon wasn't entirely wrong. We didn't worship it, not really. But I still felt like I needed to phrase things like I was speaking to a god. Please hear us. Please help us. Shelter us from this thing that has befallen us. This thing that has trapped us while doing your work on your behalf. We have been diligent servants, and we appreciate all the blessings and protections you have given us. Please find us and help us now. I looked over to find Gordon had come to kneel next to me, his eyes wet and gleaming as he met my own. Voice thick, he echoed the last of my words. Please find us. Help us. Please. Behind us, a voice blossomed in the dark. It will not help you or find you. Not here. Only I am with you. So if you must pray, pray to me. We both turned toward the sound, my whole body shaking with fear. I wasn't sure what I expected to see, but I actually felt a pang of disappointment when I didn't see anything at all. But then, no, that wasn't quite right. Because the far corner of the room was darker, wasn't it? A cobweb of shadow that clung to every surface, as though the light was afraid to go any farther in. Looking into that shadow, I tried to keep my voice steady as I responded. What do you want? What do you want from us to set us free? The darkness seemed to shift and swell slightly before deepening into a thicker patch of impossible night. What do you think I want, silly? Its voice had been loud and harsh, coming from the corner of the room, but was soft as silk when it moved next to my ear. A sacrifice. It has to be me. Gordon and I had been sitting together in the kitchen. It was a silly attempt at privacy, of course. The thing that had trapped us in our home was, at least so far as we could tell, everywhere. Still, being in the living room with that unnatural patch of shadow made my skin crawl, and I could tell Gordon was relieved when I suggested we move before talking. It hadn't said anything more after a sacrifice, but I think we both instinctively knew what that meant. One of us had to stay, to keep it company, or serve it, or feed it. I was already trying to find the best way to broach the topic when Gordon volunteered himself. I felt my eyes widen as blood began to pound in my ears. What? No, Gordon. There has to be another. We'll figure out something. His face hardened briefly, his eyebrows furrowing as he prepared to give some harsh rebuttal, some argument as to why he was right. But then his face crumpled, tears coming to his eyes as he looked at me pleadingly. "Gracie, I'm no good for him. Not compared to you. And when did you do this? When did you make a deal with this thing?" Grace's voice was icy and hard behind me. Gordon looked down again. "Nearly 5 years ago now. For a long time I didn't listen or agree to anything. Until I did. A short, sorrowful laugh at my back and then... And you haven't felt our master since." He just shook his head silently. "And the night the tape failed, the night the room flooded, and we almost all drowned. Was that your doing?" Gordon jerked as though he had been lashed with an unseen whip, a gasp of air escaping him as he looked between me and her. "I broke the tape barrier. It told me to, as proof that I would honor the deal." Raising his hands, he took a step forward. "It promised we would all live. Not the client, no, but the three of us. I would not have done it otherwise. You have to believe me." I gave a snort of disgust. "Real nice of you to get a promise for my safety. Had to keep your sacrificial lamb from drowning, I guess." Sighing, he gave me a nod. "You're right, of course. And I truly am sorry. I do care about you. We both do. But this is our child, and we need you to stay." I stood up slowly, my eyes never leaving Gordon's. "Do you now?" I felt something swell inside me, pass through me just then. I heard more words spoken with my voice. "Then ask for it. Call to your new master and see if it keeps its bargain." He frowned uncertainly at me, but then a thought seemed to cross his mind. Perhaps what happened the last time he hesitated in this place. Looking at Grace again, he called out to the darkness nestled in the corners of the room. "I've honored our bargain. I give you Clint, who I love, who we both love. In exchange, give us our freedom and the safe return of our son, Nicholas." His eyes were wild as he looked around, waiting for a response. Anger flaring in my chest again, I couldn't help but laugh at him. "You're a fool. You gave up the protection and miracle of something truly wondrous. For what? A fucking pitcher plant. Because that's all it is. Not a god, not a genie to give you back your son or your life. It's just an emptiness with teeth and appetite that traps anything dumb enough to wander inside." Gordon was shaking his head again, clutching his hands together as though in prayer. "I beseech thee, free me and my family." He pointed at me. "Take this boy who mocks you and your power." I heard Grace stand up behind me. "Gordon, it isn't going to listen to you. It knows it can't stop our master when it is ready for us to leave. I didn't understand before, but I do now." She put her hand on my shoulder. "You can feel it now, can't you?" Glancing back at her, I nodded. "Yeah, since at least Braxton. More since I met it. It's not like hearing it speak to me exactly, but it's always there, and I can feel it push me sometimes. One way or another." Swallowing, I gave a weak laugh. "Or when it needs me to say or do something in particular." She nodded back. "I used to get that sometimes. Not as strong, but sometimes." Grace let out a shuddering breath as she looked over to Gordon. Maybe if I had understood it better back then, I could have gotten us all out without losing Nick. I don't think so. I don't think my connection was strong enough, but I'll never know for sure. Letting out a quiet sob, she wiped her eyes before returning her gaze to Gordon. "It's too late now anyway. It's too late for anything." She looked back to me, her expression unreadable. "Will it let us take Gordon with us?" I felt my stomach twist into a ball of ice at her question. The anger was still there, but the sadness and regret were stronger in that moment. He has broken covenant and cast its lot with the thing that lives here. So here he will remain. Not my words, but I heard my voice saying it all the same. Grace seemed to understand that too, giving my shoulder a squeeze as she nodded. "And if I choose to stay here with him?" The other spoke through me again. "You cannot remain if you do not break covenant. And if you break covenant, you will not save him, but only condemn yourself. And the thing that lives here is very strange and cruel." Gordon stepped closer, his breath hot and panicked as he grabbed her hand and my arm. "I'm still here, you know. Don't talk about me like I'm not here." I looked at him, my voice empty of the pity that I still felt in my heart. "You are here, Gordon, which is nowhere, and that is where you will stay." I could tell the next words that were coming, and I tried not to say them, to give the two of them more time, but it was no use. I could have just as easily stopped a storm or a flood. "Release us now, in the name of the one we serve." The next moment, Grace and I were outside, and even though I didn't think I could really hear the sound, it seemed I could feel the echoes of Gordon screaming in the webs of some faraway dark. Hours later, we sat outside Grace's house. I'd never seen it before, and I don't know what I had imagined, but it wasn't this. A small ranch-style house with weeds growing in the front yard and an air of lonely disuse. I thought about talking to her a dozen times as we drove, but I'd always lost my nerve. At one point, she'd even had me pull over so she could be sick in the grass, but other than asking if she was okay to ride again and giving her a bottle of water, I didn't say a word. I was still trying to figure out how to start when she broke the silence. I don't know if we told you this, but when we went to see our benefactor, we went in separately. I don't know why we knew to. Maybe some scrap of ritual we had. Just instinct. It's been so long ago now, I really don't remember. But I recall walking up to a doorway in that warehouse, just a slip of nothing in the air that you could only see if you looked just right. And on the other side, it was a field of flowers. I turned to look at her, but she kept staring out the windshield as she continued on. But not just any flowers or field. It was the field and flowers from a day when I was 8 or 9. I had wandered off from a trip, a picnic, I don't know now. But I had found myself in this beautiful field filled with, well, at the time the word I thought of was magic. Everything felt special and meaningful and rich with layers of connection and mystery and excitement. It all felt true and wonderful, and I felt like I was part of it. She wiped at her eyes. It was the closest I'd ever felt to some idea of God, and it was the happiest I've ever been, and I'd been chasing it ever since, until that night I stepped through the door. She looked at me expectantly, and I gave her a nod as I began. When I went through, I stepped into this enormous ballroom. Marble floors and columns, ornately carved walls so tall I could see the tops of them. Everywhere there was this golden glow in the air, and in the middle of the room was, well, it was a giant red dragon. She raised an eyebrow as I went on. I know. I hadn't ever seen a real dragon, of course, and maybe I'm an idiot, but I didn't make the connection until you told me about the field. But I think I remember now. When I was little, like really little, I went to a used bookstore with my dad. It's probably one of the first clear memories I have as a kid. Anyway, I remember seeing this book, some fantasy paperback on a cheap shelf down low, where I could spot it. On the cover there was this giant red dragon flying. I asked my dad what it was, and he told me it was a dragon. I asked him if it was real. I felt surprise as my voice grew thick with emotion. He said it was real if I believed. Grace reached over and squeezed my hand. "When you saw the dragon, saw our master, did it do anything? With the field I just stayed a while, and then I understood enough, that this was a good thing, a special thing, and it would help us if we let it lead us to the nightmares." She sniffed. "That it could save Gordon." She looked down at her lap. "Was it like that for you?" I shook my head. Numberit spoke. "Talk to me." It felt like we talked a long time. Her face turned back to mine with a look of surprise and even dim excitement. Really? What did it say? I frowned more at myself than her. It's hard to describe. Talking to it isn't like a normal conversation. Look, have you ever been in a pool or lake for a while, and when you finally get out, you realize way more time has passed than you realized, and your memory is kind of fucked up? Not like you have amnesia or something, but just you can't really account for all the time that had passed. It's kind of like that. A bit like floating, or dreaming. I left feeling very confident, and knowing that I needed to get to you because there was some kind of danger. Since then, there's a lot I don't know or remember. Until I do. Until it's needed, I guess. And sometimes it talks through me. And is that it pushing me or possessing me? The words wouldn't quite come. So after a moment of weighted silence, I moved on. And I think I understand what it is. Kind of. I felt my face break into a grin as my worry faded into the background. It's wonder. It is magic. Or no, I mean, it's not those things. Not like the hyena was the real, true hyena. It's our connection to those things. I sighed in frustration as I tried to find the right words. It's not magic. It's our intuition that magic exists. It's not wonder. It's like our hunger to feel and see and touch the special things that get hidden from us. It's like the dragon, or the field, or whatever Gordon saw. It's that whisper in all of us that there's a richer, truer world beyond what we can see and touch, and that we're connected to it. She nodded. It's not a god, but the source of that which connects us and drives us to seek the truth and the magical and the divine. I gave a short laugh. That's a way more eloquent way of saying it. But yeah, it's that. And that has to be one of the most important things ever. Imagine if everything lost that, and we're part of protecting it, of helping it get stronger by feeding it these nightmares. I gave her hand a squeeze back. What we are doing matters so much. She looked thoughtful for a moment. Did you know that it could pull us out of there? Before you said the words, I mean. I understood why she was asking and met her gaze when I shook my head. I didn't. Like I was saying, a lot of this, when it comes through me, I don't know it until I hear myself say it. If I'd known I could force its hand and get us out, Gordon would never have had a chance to come back in. Whatever it wants, or whatever Gordon might deserve, I didn't want to leave him in there like that. She gave me a sad smile as she nodded. I know that. You're a good boy, a good man. Gordon was too. Her smile faded. That's part of what I don't understand. Yes, he was different after we lost Nick. But he was still a good man, strong and smart. How did the thing reach him to corrupt him? I accepted the limits of our benefactor's power back when we lost Nick. We had no illusions that it was omnipotent or without flaws, or it wouldn't need our help in the first place. But we have done so much work since then, and obviously it is vastly stronger because of it. Strong enough to banish the hyena, strong enough to pull us from that place as soon as you said the words, or at least make that thing fearful enough to free us. I nodded uneasily. I don't have all the answers, but maybe it just recently got strong enough. After the hyena, maybe. Grace's lips thinned down to a pale line. Or it allowed it to happen. Allowed Gordon to fall prey to that thing, to endanger all of us as part of some plan it has. She had been looking outside as she spoke, but now her eyes cut back to mine. You said that when you met it, it told you that I was in danger and you needed to get back to me, right? My stomach was starting to twist as I gave a half-heart shrug. It wasn't specific on the details of what the danger was, but it was clear enough, yeah. She nodded. And yet, there was no danger at the hospital. No danger at all except for Gordon and the thing in the house. So either our master is so limited that it blindly sensed danger, and inadvertently sent us into a trap, or it knew what it was doing. And we know it knew that Gordon had fallen, or else why would he have lost favor and protection? He almost went insane in Braxton because of it. I felt resentment coiling in my middle. Why did she have to pick at this? It was all guesses anyway, educated guesses that she was probably right about. Still, the lie of it sticky and sour on my tongue, I feigned ignorance. What are you getting at? She sighed. For all our sense of doing something good and important, we really don't understand this thing that we're serving. We don't know if it has our best interests at heart. What if it could have saved Gordon and just didn't? It was strange. I'd felt my dread and worry fall away as she spoke her last. This wasn't someone who was truly worried because she doubted the value, the rightness of what we were doing. This was someone who wanted to be rewarded, protected because of the work, wanted her family back. This was fine and reasonable, but it was a fringe benefit. The necessity and importance of the work remained, regardless of whether our master had our best interests at heart. We did not matter. If we died, others could be found to take our place. If it was lost, I couldn't even fully conceive of the hell it would trap us all in. A dark, gray lie with no hope of escape, where our minds and hearts and souls twisted and withered away. I wanted to grab her, to shout these things at her, to wake her from the selfish stupor of her own grief and doubt. But no, that wasn't the way. Instead, I just looked at her a moment longer and then, keeping my voice neutral. What if it didn't? What does that change? She looked worn down and hollowed out as she searched my face. I don't know. Just, doesn't that seem cruel and unfair? Doesn't it seem mean? Pulling my hand free from hers, I gave a dry laugh. I hated the harshness of that laugh, but I made myself hold her gaze. Mean. I let out a slow, tired breath. Grace, what in this life has made you expect something other than mean? It's been 5 months since that night. 7 jobs. They're not only more frequent, but farther away. Maybe because there are more nightmares pushing through, or it may be because the Master is getting stronger with me out in the world. Grace and Gordon used to have to go collect the elixir. They never re-entered its domain after that first time. But the doorway was still there, and they could extract the fluid, its blood for want of a better term, from growths that would appear along the aperture's edge. They knew to do that the same way they knew to do most of what they did. Some dreamlike instinct and intuition that they learned to listen to and trust. Trust was in shorter supply now. Grace says that I've changed, and I've no doubt that it's true. Some of it is the connection and influence of the thing we serve. It doesn't seem to assert control over me anymore, but I can't say for sure if that's because it respects my free will or because I have become what it needs me to be. I don't know that it matters. Because the work is what matters, and it is progressing. We no longer need the elixir. Instead, Grace just pulls a vial of my blood before we begin. Proud to say that it seems more potent and reliable than the elixir ever was. That was an imperfect, temporary solution, crudely pushed into a world where it didn't truly belong. I am our Master's representative, an anchor in this reality, a fulcrum to bring change. My thoughts are strange sometimes. Part of the process of evolution, as I grow past my old self, my old doubts and fears and failings. And isn't that the whole point? To seek what is real, what is special, to have purpose and find truth, to move beyond being just another dreamer. Grace clears her throat, and I pull myself free from my reverie. She looks younger now, more vital, though her eyes seem flat and empty more often than I'd like. Giving her a smiling nod, I look down at the child tied to the bed. We don't need the ritual of tape any longer, but not all precautions and ritual have been abandoned. Some things must always be. The blood, the bindings, and the story. Folding my hands behind me, I watch as Grace empties the vial. The child winces at the taste, but only for a moment. Then he is drifting, and it is time for me to begin. Once upon a time, there was a dream. Now you may think your dreams are your own, that you make them from your own memories, your own imagination. But you would be mistaken. The dreams come before the dreamers. We may put our own faces and hopes and fears on the dreams we encounter, but that is simply a trick we've developed to try and hide from a simple truth. We do not make the dreams. The dreams make us.